Hello, everyone. This is Al Fadi. Thank you so much, as always, of course, for joining us to watch this exciting video series, the one we called The Search for Muhammad, or The Quest for the Real Muhammad, basically. And thank you for your interactions, your questions, and your comments. Today, so far, I should say, we have addressed a number of historical problems related, for instance, to coins, rock inscriptions. But today we're going to talk about further, historical problems as evidence that there is some real holes in the narrative concerning Muhammad and his person and the historical, basically, Muhammad in this case. With that in mind, of course, I want to turn the focus here on Dr. Jay Smith, who've been doing an amazing work really in this field, and you have been really doing a great job unpacking all of these difficulties. So what further evidence or problems in this case do we have?
Yeah, just to clarify, I'm not doing the research in this area. People like Mel, who is on Sneakers Corner, Murad, who's from the Middle East. We have Joe, who is also from England and also from Europe. We then also have Bala, who is in India, and then we have Sarah, who's down in the Southern Hemisphere. But these are people who have actually done a lot of the research. I'd already mentioned Odin LaFontaine. These guys and gals have been working on this material for over 20 years. All I'm doing is taking what they have introduced to me, thrown at me, and being their mouthpiece, because they need somebody who can actually get online, who can go up on the internet and actually communicate it so others can then appreciate it, but also use it in their own ministry or with Muslims that they're engaging with publicly. So that's all I am. I'm nothing more than that. Please don't think that I'm actually doing the journal research. I'm not capable of doing this kind of research. They're way ahead of me. And that's why it's so good to be able to impose and take their material and then get it out to the whole world. And what are they finding? And so here's some other historical problems. Let's just take and let's go up on the slide and let's look at the rightly guided caliphs, because certainly you would assume if there was a person named Abu Bakr who is living in Medina, was a caliph for 2 years, especially Umar, who comes after him from 634 to 644, that 10-year period, whereas Islam has moved its borders out. It's now moving across all the way out from the west. It's moving all the way out over to Afghanistan, moving in the east towards North Africa, getting across Egypt and all the rest. You would assume that people would know who these guys are. They caliphs, if they're caliphs, that means their name would be out there. The coins would have had their names on it. We know that didn't happen. The inscriptions would be referring to them. We know that didn't happen. But someone somewhere should know about these characters, these first rightly guided caliphs, as they call it. They call it the golden period of Islam. They call it the Rashidun period. Why did they call it? Because this is where Islam really took form. This is where it made a force for itself and expanded its borders. And as they conquered right, left, going both west and east, they then took over a lot of these cities, and they would have now, someone somewhere would have known about these guys. You would think. You would hope.
That's right.
That's what we are always looking for. So one of the things that this group of the researchers have been doing, and they've been working on this for about 5 to 10, some as many as 20 years, they've been asking this question: where are these rightly guided caliphs? And if you look on the screen there, they cannot find, first of all, they cannot find the 9th century Muhammad. So can we find these caliphs at least? There is no rock inscription in the 7th century which uses that term caliph to begin with. That's the first thing they noticed. More than that, the term which was used was Amir al-Mu'minin.
Amir al-Mu'minin, yeah.
Commander of the faithful, which does not denote a successor. So even the term caliph is not found in these rock inscriptions or any of these references from the 7th century. That term was not used. Yet today, we're using that term all the time to refer to these 4 characters. Or you might say Muhammad would be the first caliph from 624 up until he died in 632. The later term caliph was introduced as Khalifat by Rasulullah, means the successor and messenger of God. That is introduced in the 8th and 9th century, not in the 7th century. So already you've got a problem here, because even the term it's in the wrong century. Okay?
So even the term, if these people existed, was applied to them later.
And when later? The 9th and 10th century applies it to them, which means it's a redaction back.
Exactly.
Again, here's another example of a redaction back. So, I was really hammered by Yusuf Qadi for getting the wrong name at the wrong in the wrong century. Well, how about him hammering the Islamic traditions for doing the same problem?
That's right.
They should have known better that this word would not have existed that early. So why are they calling him a caliph?
Maybe he should take a deep dive into this. Yeah.
Let's go back to the slide here. So what about any references to these first four caliphs, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali? Are there any references to these names? Now remember, these names are very popular names. So of course you're going to have references to people called these. But notice that not one of them is a caliph. These inscriptions refer to them. That's why their historicity is seriously in doubt. Every attempt has been made to get the story that straight has failed. We just cannot find these caliphs referred to anywhere. Abu Bakr, let's look at Abu Bakr. Could not have been a caliph because all the contradictory evidence rules that out. I don't have time to unpack that. Go look at Mel and what he has done with Abu Bakr and also Murad. Mel and Murad have done a great job just showing that Abu Bakr could not have existed because there is nobody called that name. Yes, there are people called that name, but they're nothing more than people who are writing receipts on things of people exchanging. There's no king or caliph referred, or in this case, no Amir al-Mu'minin who is called that. Oh, Umar. His history rests on one rock inscription that could be about anyone of that name. Just anybody. That's the only reference we can find for someone named Umar. He did exist. Someone did exist named Umar. But as we're finding with Muhammad, we're going to find later there is actually another Muhammad that existed in the 7th century, but it's not the Muhammad of the 9th century. He lived 100 miles too far north, and he was a Christian, and he was a king who was in charge of 30 cities. So you can see the difficulty is we can't place this Umar with anybody who is later or anybody who is earlier. Uthman, we can't find anything for him. There's nothing, no reference for him at all. So just throw him out. And then, of course, Ali of the 7th century. First of all, he was never a caliph. He was never any of that sort. He died 3 years before his reign was meant to even have ended. So you can see they've got the wrong Ali. He was a guy, but he was not a caliph, and he certainly was not anybody who is related to Muhammad.
So one thing is interesting here. Are you telling me Uthman, who is credited for the Uthmanic Rasm, the first canon of the Quran, is not referenced in any of these important inscriptions and other things?
Can't even find him. And this is why I keep on asking. I've been asking this since 1995. You keep on telling me about this guy named Uthman, and you keep on telling me about the fact that he had this Quran. And I've always asked for 25 years, can you show me where this guy exists to begin with? And secondly, can you show me where this Quran that supposedly he canonized in 652, can you please help me here? For 25 years I've asked this question, and nobody can show it. And all they can say, well, he's referred to, and if we look at all the references he's referred to, they refer back to him, and all these references where he's referred to come from the 9th and 10th century. And even the references to his Quran come from the 9th and 10th century. And finally, when we do get the manuscripts, and people like Tahir Altukulic and Ekmel Nisalan, these two Turkish scholars from 2002 to 2007, finally look at these 6 major manuscripts, they have realized that these manuscripts don't even come from a guy named Uthman. They don't come from that time period. In fact, they're saying they don't even come from copies of that time period.
Right.
These are Muslim scholars, and they were saying this in 2007. We're now in 2020, and yet Muslims are not listening and not looking, and they still can't come up with anybody called Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. And that's why we need to be careful. If you're going to be talking about this, you need to come up with evidence. Now, what I'm going to do in the next episode, what I want to do is I want to actually look about the Hijrah. I want to go into the Hijrah, and then I also want to look at the 741 date. Well, I think that's enough for this one, because this is devastating in and of itself. Forget about Muhammad. We can't even find the guys that follow him. And we can't find anybody who is historical until Muawiyah.
Right.
Of what we would recognize as Muslim, if he were a Muslim. And what we now know about Muawiyah, as we saw in the coins, has nothing to do with Islam.